new court documents are giving us new clues about the investigations into President Trump and his allies. And as we move deeper to December, some of those aides could be headed to prison. Over the weekend, we got the sentencing memo for Michael Cohen, which outlined a number of key points, including the fact that the president's former fixer is not only cooperating with Mueller and the Southern District of New York, but he's also working with New York Attorney General and the state tax authorities. Man, that's a lot. I want to bring in NBC News intelligence and national security reporter Ken Dilanian and NBC investigations reporter Tom Winter and Elliot Williams, a former federal prosecutor and former deputy assistant attorney general. I got a full house. All right, Tom. 4. Cohen is cooperating with 4 different investigations, including one that is investigating the Trump Foundation. And that one hits directly the Trump children. Just how much of a threat is Michael Cohen to the Trump family? Because I got to tell you, that guy is parading around New York City at every Upper East Side restaurant like he doesn't have a care in the world.
Well, I think, with respect to threat, that would imply that there's definitive criminal behavior at, say, the Trump Foundation that you mentioned or in any of the other investigations that he's helping with. We don't yet know that for certain. However, what we do know is that this person was the right-hand man to the Trump organization and to the president. So if anybody can help them understand certain things, for instance, they could look at emails, they could look at documents, and they could say, Michael, what did this all mean? Where did this come from? Why did you guys have this discussion? They could look at financial statements and say, well, what was this about? And where did this money go? And what's this bank account go for? So he is the ultimate tour guide to everything Trump Organization, Trump Foundation, all those type of things. So for them, if they think that they have criminal activity or he can point them to criminal activity, to me, it says that he's a very significant witness potentially.
He's the ultimate tour guide who just months ago worshipped at the altar of Donald Trump. So, Ken, looking at the sentencing memo, do we know if he's got a deal? Yes, he could be the tour guide, but he himself is entangled in a whole lot of wrongdoing, and the president says this guy's just trying to cut a deal for himself.
And that's absolutely what he's trying to do. He's asking for basically time served. But what we learned from this sentencing memo, I think the biggest thing we learned...
Time served? He hasn't served any time.
A few days, I guess. Is
the booking time counts.
The booking
time. Believe it or not, right. Every time
really?
When he went into Federal Plaza that day, I think I was on set with Ali, that moment from when he puts in his fingerprint that he's presented in court, that's technically time served. I know it's bizarre.
And that probably isn't going to happen. But we learned that this man, Michael Cohen, is all in on cooperation. There's not going to be a Paul Manafort here. The lawyers were adamant about that. In fact, they said in court documents, and he said in court, that he's committed some of his crimes out of loyalty to Donald Trump. And we also learned that he had 7 separate meetings with the special counsel's office alone. That doesn't include those meetings with the other agencies that Tom mentioned. And then, we also learned something from Donald Trump's reaction to the latest Michael Cohen plea. Remember that Donald Trump stood on the South Lawn and called Michael Cohen a liar. But then later, Rudy Giuliani said that his story about the Trump Tower Moscow lined up with what Cohen is saying. So what exactly is Trump saying he lied about? Perhaps it's something that's not in the plea agreement that he believes that Cohen is talking to prosecutors about that could implicate Donald Trump.
Oh, snap. All right, Elliot, I want to share what Lawfare said about the sentencing memo. Quote, it goes out of its way to emphasize just how much of Cohen's criminal conduct is traceable, either to direct instructions from Donald Trump or to overzealous assistance of him. But that's a really important distinction because, for instance, the memo says Cohen paid off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal because Trump told him to. But it does not say that Trump told him to lie about Trump Tower. Those are 2 very different actions that would get very different punishment. What do you make of that?
Right. So it doesn't look good for Michael Cohen in any sense here, right? And so what the sentencing memo does is lay out a number of circumstances, or the number of things that Cohen has done in furtherance of lying on behalf of Trump. What we're seeing here comes down to loyalty, how much individuals and how far they're willing to stick their necks out, to protect the president. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that we're taking at face value the fact that Michael Cohen is being honest here, and we should know that everybody in the president's orbit seems to have a history of willing to stretch the truth or lie or fabricate facts on his behalf. So I'd be reluctant to rush to getting behind Michael Cohen as sort of our savior here. However, it is pretty clear that he's got the goods and has come with the receipts on, as you were talking about with Ken and Tom, all of these investigations. You're talking about tax, you're talking about criminal liability, you're talking about the payoffs to the Playboy model and so on. So it's just, he's gotten himself into a heap of trouble. It's clearly, I would think the walls are closing on the Trump Organization and the Trump family, and we're just going to continue to see what Mueller is laying out in these documents that are getting increasingly detailed and providing more and more facts.
All right, Ken, I want to play what incoming Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler said on Meet the Press, specifically about President Trump and his ties to Russia.
The fact that he was lying to the American people about doing business in Russia, and that the Kremlin knew he was lying, gave the Kremlin a hold over him. And one question we have now is, does the Kremlin still have holds over him?
And this is an issue. We talked about it on Friday. The two countries, whenever we scratch our head at the president's approach in terms of foreign policy to two specific countries, are Saudi Arabia and Russia. And the more we learn that the president could very likely have business ties to those countries, the more uncomfortable we are. How worried should Capitol Hill be about this possible hold or information they have over the president?
Well, look, both Republicans and Democrats have been worried about this from the moment Trump got elected. Democrats say it publicly, Republicans say it privately. But
yeah, if you only say it privately, then you're not actually that worried. If you're worried, you do something about it.
Well, and you know what? Now we know that while Donald Trump was making these bizarrely favorable statements about Vladimir Putin that no one could explain, the most favorable pro-Russian campaign in U.S. history, he was seeking favors from Putin's government throughout the campaign. And these guys are now wondering, what else don't we know about relationships with Russia that could still be coloring his favorable behavior towards that adversary country today?
Moreover, the fact that the president kept trying to insist that the Moscow deal was completely legal, what was the word? Cool and totally legal, or whatever he said.
Cool and totally legal.
Cool, totally legal. Then why was he concealing facts about it all of this time? If it was perfectly an above-board transaction that he shouldn't have been worried about, why couldn't he have admitted it years ago? But he, starting back in 2015, the statements were repeated that I have no ties to Russia and I have no business dealings in Russia. It just does not smell good.
Okay, but take me from not smelling good to proving that there's wrongdoing, because those are two very different things. Like, yes, this is clearly not best practices. In fact, it's worst practices. But how hard is it to prove that there's an actual link of wrongdoing, that Russia's connection to Trump had influence over his conduct on the campaign trail?
The statements are circumstantial evidence, and they will all come in. The statements from the president, potentially, the statements from Cohen and Manafort and all these individuals. And what we're seeing, it's the trail of crumbs that we saw, I think, in the Axios article this morning, is that the emails might exist, the bank records, the phone logs, and so on, that are more direct evidence of what might have gone on. So, no, certainly we don't know for certain right now that there was illegality. But as you see, Mueller is coming forward with a great deal of evidence and information, and it just remains to be seen what's going to come out.
Tom, I want to touch on Roger Stone before we go. I want to play what he said on ABC, specifically about WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Listen.
You're saying you never spoke with Julian Assange, never contacted WikiLeaks, never spoke about any of that to President Trump?
That is absolutely correct. I had no contact with Assange. Assange himself has said, while Roger Stone is a brilliant spin master, we've had no communication with him whatsoever.
Okay, so you heard him. He said never spoke, never, ever, not happening. Except here's what Roger Stone said during the campaign in 2016 to Republicans in Florida.
I actually have communicated with Assange. I believe the next tranche of his documents pertain to the Clinton Foundation, but there's no telling what the October surprise may be.
So one way or the other, that man's a liar. Does that automatically make him a target for Robert Mueller?
I think he's an automatic target for Robert Mueller because he talked about certain things that Julian Assange had before it was public, that WikiLeaks published them. A very interesting thing in that soundbite that you just played, and something I've been keying on, he mentioned the Clinton Foundation. Who was John Podesta really? For the bulk of his emails that were released, he was the chairman of the Clinton Foundation. Most of the, I would say, more newsworthy things that he had to do with the Clinton Foundation because he was the chairman. He had financials, he had statements, he had emails back and forth. So I think it's very interesting that he specifically mentions October surprise. That's when the emails come out. And he specifically mentions the Clinton Foundation. So I think he's definitely a worthwhile subject, if you will, for Robert Mueller.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.